Welcome, everybody. Welcome on Twitch, YouTube, TikTok, and on Discord. Hello. The food's important. Okay, so here's the thing. My the company that one of the companies that I freelance for, um, they are going under, and so they've pretty much scrapped an entire publication, being the entire publication that I work for. So no income, no steady income. That's gonna be fun. Yay. While the world is falling apart, I have no steady income. Yes, of course you can. And yee. Hello, Moss. And hello, Anachronista. Hello, everybody watching on the other channels. If you don't comment, I will not see you. So, hi. Come say hi. Yeah, so I got that email today. And then I told my mom that this is what happens. And she says, that's your luck, right? And that is not the right thing to say. To anybody who's a parent, that is not the right thing to say to your kid. So yeah, I have this goal. I have that one. I left. I left before dinner. Because I was like, nope, nope, not doing this, not doing this today. Yeah. And so yeah, not exactly fighting mom, just struggling to get through the day. But, we do the things because we must. So we get into Orientalism. We are still on chapter 2. We've been reading this book since I think November, and we are still on chapter 2 because this is really fucking dense. And let's make fun of academics, please, because there was an academic at the conference today who really pissed me the fuck off. Yeah. And when I brought up the question of indigenous treaties as to why, colonization shouldn't be added to the, yeah, shouldn't be added to the definition, part of the definition of apartheid. She was like, some countries that have working apartheid in them did not experience colonization, yada yada yada. I'm like, it's inextricable. You cannot separate them. And when I was like, yeah, maybe the US, being from the US, you like not really either understanding or want to get it, because if you include colonization in it, people of the country can sue for like damages from segregation and redlining and Jim Crow and all of those kind of things. And then when I brought up the treaties, motherfucker walked away. Yeah, the word she used. Anyway, let's get to Orientalism, some more white people fuckery. Because for being allergic to the sun, they really pulled a number on us. So last time we finished on page 170, talking about the concert of the Orient and the work being orchestrated by Europeans. And even if they moved to the Orient as such, they would see it as this mythologized existence, them being the virtuoso of their own opera, their own masterpiece, in this highly stylized and mythologized? Is mythologized a word? This highly mythologized place. And he draws on the works of Naval, whose work was solidly fixed on imagination and unrealizable aesthetic. So we go on from there. This was also true to a certain extent of scholarly French travelers in the Orient. Most of them were interested in the biblical past or in the Crusades, as Henri Bordeaux had argued in his Voyages. To these names we must add, at Hassan al-Nuti's suggestion, the names of Oriental Semitists, people who study Semitic language, including Quatremer, Solsi, the explorer of the Dead Sea, Renan as Phoenician archaeologist, Judas, the student of Phoenician languages, Cartefego, and Defremery, who studied the Ansarians, Ismailis, and Seljuks, Clermont Ganneau, who explored Judea, and the Marquis de Vergue, that's such a weird spelling, whose work centered on Palmyrean epigraphy. I swear, academics make up shit just to sound smart. In addition, there was a whole school of Egyptologists descended from Champollion and Mariette, a school that would later include Maspero and Legrand. As an index of the differences between British realities and French fantasies emerged, it is worthwhile recalling the words in Cairo of the painter Ludwig Lepik, who commented sadly in 1884, 2 years after the British occupation had begun, the Orient died in Cairo. Only Renan, ever the realistic racist, condoned the British suppression of Arabi's nationalist rebellion, which, out of his greater wisdom, says was a disgrace to civilization. Of course he would say that. Unlike Volney and Napoleon, 19th century French pilgrims did not seek a scientific so much as exotic yet especially attractive reality. This is true of the literary pilgrims, beginning with Chateaubriand, who found the Orient a locale sympathetic to private myths, obsessions, and requirements for literary gain. Here we notice how all the pilgrims, but especially the French ones, exploit the Orient in their work so as in some urgent way to justify their existential vocation. Only where there's some additional cognitive purpose in writing about the Orient does the outpouring about himself and also about France as a power in the Orient that second enterprise mutes and finally controls imperatives heaped upon his style by his soul, his memory, and his imagination emerge. No pilgrim, French or English, could so ruthlessly dominate his self or subject as Lane did. Even Burton and Lawrence, of whom the former fashioned a deliberately Muslim pilgrimage and the latter what he called a reverse pilgrimage away from Mecca, delivered masses of historical, political, and social Orientalism that were never free of their egos, as Lane was of his. This is why Burton, Lawrence, and Charles Doughty occupy a middle position between Lane and Chateaubriand. Chateaubriand's itinerary from Paris to Jerusalem and from Jerusalem to Paris, 1810 to 1811, records and details a journey undertaken in 1805 to 1806, after he traveled in North America. Its many hundreds of pages bear witness to the author's admission that I speak endlessly about myself, so much so that Stendhal, no self-abnegating writer himself, could find his failure as a knowledgeable traveler to be the result of stinking egotism. He brought a heavy load of personal objectives and suppositions to the Orient, unloaded them there, and proceeded after to push people, places, and ideas around in the Orient as if nothing could resist his imperious imagination. So European. So European. But that was pretty much every travel writer's imagination when it came to the Orient. This is their land, this is their plaything, not their land, their plaything, to do with what they will. They can bend the reality of the global south to their liking and to their needs. Fatima, there's hardly anyone here. Chateaubriand came into the Orient as a constructed figure, not as a true self, because he created this myth about himself as well. For him, Bonaparte was the last crusader. His turn was the last Frenchman who left the country to travel the Holy Land with the ideas, goals, and sentiments of a pilgrim of former times. But there were other reasons. Symmetry. Having been to the New World and seen the monuments of nature, he needed to complete his circle of studies by visiting the Orient and its monuments of knowledge. As he had studied Roman and Celtic antiquity, all that was left for him was the ruins of Athens, Memphis, Carthage. Self-completion. He needed to replenish his stock of images. Confirmation of the importance of the religious spirit, saying religious is a kind of universal language understood by all men, and where better to observe it than there in the Orient, even in lands where a comparatively low religion like Islam held sway. It is the first day of Lent. Mother, I crave violence. Yes, Moss. It's a long story, I'll tell you in the server. Above all, the need to see things not as they were, but as Chateaubriand supposed they were. The Quran was the life of Muhammad, peace be upon him. It contained, in principle, the civilization that would not elevate the character. This is a direct translation from French, so... Oh, the livre is not the life. The book of Muhammad, peace be upon him. The book, he continued, more or less freely inventing everything as he went along, preaches neither hatred or tyranny or love of liberty. So preciously constituted a figure as Chateaubriand, the Orient was a decrepit canvas waiting his restorative efforts. The Oriental Arab was a civilized man fallen into a savage state. No wonder, he says. Then, as he watched the Arabs trying to speak French, Chateaubriand felt like Robinson Crusoe, thrilled by hearing his parrot speak for the first time. Yeah. I like that meme where, life is pain, and then somebody writes au chocolat, so life is pain au chocolat. Yeah. True, there were places like Bethlehem, whose etymological meaning Chateaubriand got completely wrong, in which one found again some semblance of real, that is, European civilization, but few and far between. Everywhere one counted Orientals, Arabs, whose civilization, religion, and manners were considered so low, barbaric, and antithetical to merit reconquest. The Crusades, he argued, were not aggression, they were a just Christian counterpart to Omar's arrival in Europe. Oh, that is so fucking racist. Besides, he added, even if the Crusades in their modern and original form were the aggression, the issue they raised transcended such questions of ordinary mortality. Quote, the Crusades were not only about the deliverance of the Holy Sepulchre, but more about knowing which would win on earth. A cult that was civilization's enemy, systematically favorable to ignorance, Islam, to despotism, slavery, or a cult that caused to reawaken modern people the genius of sage antiquity and abolished base servitude. What? This is the religion of people who invented slavery. The worst form of it. What? Selling people as though they were livestock. He's talking about them, right? and I'll set fire to the Crusades. Okay, shut up, Nikki. This is the first significant mention of an idea that would acquire a most unbearable, next to mindless authority of the European writing, the theme of Europe teaching the Orient the meaning of liberty, which is an idea that he and everyone after him believed that Orientals, and especially Muslims, knew nothing about. Quote, "Of liberty they know nothing, of propriety they have none. Force is their god. When they go for long periods without seeing conquerors who do heavenly justice, they have an air of soldiers without a leader, citizens without legislators, and family without a father." Unquote. Already in 1810, we have a European talking like Cromer in 1910, arguing that Orientals require conquest and finding no paradox that a Western conquest of the Orient was not conquest after all, but liberty. It has been their thing. Moss. I need to have a shower after that. 'Twas a culture war. He puts the whole idea in romantic redemptive terms of a Christian mission to revive a dead world, to quicken in it a sense of its own potential, one which only a European can discern underneath a lifeless and degenerate surface. For the traveler, this means that he must use the Old Testament and Gospels to guide as his guide in Palestine. Even Chateaubriand writes of Palestine. Just by the way. 'Twas colonialism, my lord. Only in this way can the apparent degeneration of the modern Orient be gotten beyond. Yet Chateaubriand senses no irony in the fact that his tour and vision will reveal nothing to him about the modern Oriental and his destiny. Just noting that this was written in 1810. To all you Zionists out there. What matters about the Orient is what it lets happen to him, what it allows his spirit to do, what permits him to reveal about himself, his ideas and expectations. The liberty that so concerns him is more of his own release from the Orient's hostile wastes than he can fucking leave. He doesn't have to be there. Where his release allows him to go directly back is to the realm of imagination and interpretation. Description of the Orient is obliterated by the designs and patterns foisted upon it by the imperial ego. I love that line. Foisted upon it by the imperial ego. Also, how are you doing, JJ? I saw you live earlier and I could not stay. Which makes no secret of its powers. If in Lane's prose we watch the ego disappear so that the Orient may appear in realistic detail, in Chateaubriand the ego dissolves itself in the completion and contemplation of wonders that it creates, and then is reborn, stronger than ever, more able to savor its powers and enjoy its own interpretations. He says, when one travels in Judea, the first great ennui grips the heart, but when, passing from one solitary place to another, space stretches out without limits before you. Slowly the ennui dissipates, and one feels a secret terror, which, far from depressing the soul, gives it courage and elevates one's native genius. I think they're compensating for something. Yeah. Please remember that I have this goal. I have no job. Extraordinary things are disclosed from all parts of the earth, worked over by miracles. The burning sun, impetus eagle, the sterile fig tree, of all poetry, all the scenes from scripture are present. Every name encloses a mystery. Every grotto declares the future. Every summit retains within it the accents of a prophet. God himself has spoken from these shores. The arid torrents, the riven rocks, the open tombs attest to the prodigy. The desert still seems struck dumb with terror, and one would say that it has still not been able to break the silence since it heard the voice of an eternal. End quote. The process of thought in this passage is revealing. An experience of a Pascalian terror does not merely reduce one's self-confidence, it stimulates it. The barren landscape stands forth like an illuminated text, presenting itself to the scrutiny of a strong, refortified ego. Chateaubriand himself has transcended the abject, if frightening, reality of the contemporary Orient, so he may stand as an original and creative relationship to it, or in original and creative relationship to it. By the end of the passage, he is no longer a modern man, but a visionary seer, more or less contemporary with God himself. If the Judean desert has been silent since God spoke there, it is Chateaubriand who can hear the silence, understand its meaning, and, to the reader, make the desert speak again. Sounds like colonialism to me. The great gifts of sympathetic intuition, which had enabled Chateaubriand to represent and interpret North American mysteries in René and Alta, as well as Christianity in The Genius of Christianity, are aroused to even greater feats of the interpretation during the itinerary. The rot absolutely thinks itself new every single time. But it's not new. It's an old, very tired script. You know, notice that Israelis say, we are greening the desert. Excuse me, Palestine was green before you destroyed all of the olive trees and more than 70% of its biodiversity. You have to make it a desert first before you green it, I guess. And what do? You put up houses with lawns. That's not greening the desert. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Lawn is gross. No longer is the author dealing with natural primitivity and romantic sentiment. He is dealing with eternal creativity and divine originality, for it is in the biblical Orient that they were first deposited and have remained there in unmediated and latent form. Of course, they cannot be simply grasped. They must be aspired to and achieved by the colonizer himself. And it is this ambitious purpose that the itinerary is made to serve. Just as the text, his ego must be reconstructed just as through the text, his ego must be reconstructed radically enough to get the job done. Unlike Lane, Chateaubriand attempts to consume the Orient. He not only appropriates it, he represents and speaks for it. Not in history, but beyond, in the timeless dimension of a completely healed world, where men and lands, God and men, are one. In Jerusalem, therefore, the center of his vision at the ultimate end of his pilgrimage, he grants himself a total reconciliation with the Orient as Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Greek, Persian, Roman, and finally French. He is moved by the plight of the Jews, but judges that they serve to illuminate his general vision and as a further benefit give necessary poignance to his Christian vindictiveness. God, he says, has chosen a new people, and it is not the Jews. He makes some other concessions to terrestrial reality, however. If Jerusalem is booked into his itinerary as a final extraterrestrial goal, Egypt provides him with material for political excursus. His ideas about Egypt supplement his pilgrimage nicely. The magnificent Nile Delta moves him to assert that, quote, I found only the memories of my glorious country worth those magnificent plains. I saw the remains of monuments of a new civilization brought to the banks of the Nile by the genius of France. You're going to look at the Taj Mahal. You're going to look at Al-Aqsa. you're going to look at all of these buildings and say French architecture is better, that France is more beautiful. Than the old cobbled streets of Jerusalem. I don't. These ideas are put in a nostalgic mode because in Egypt, Chateaubriand believes that he can equate the absence of France with the absence of a free government ruling a happy people. After Jerusalem, Egypt appears to be only kind of spiritual, an anticlimax. After political commentary of its sorry state, he asks himself the routine question about difference as a result of historical development. How can this degenerate, stupid mob of Mussulmans, as he calls them, have come to inhabit the same land whose vastly different owners so impressed Herodotus and Diodorus? Diodorus. Thank you. This is a fitting valedictory to Egypt, which he leaves for Tunis, Carthaginian ruins, and finally home. Yet he does one last thing of note in Egypt. Unable to do more than look at the pyramids from a distance, he takes the trouble to send an emissary there and have him inscribe his, Chateaubriand's, name on the stone, adding, for our benefit, one has to fulfill the little obligations of a pious traveler. So he didn't even go there himself. He just had somebody else write his name. Wow. He vandalized somebody's tomb. Wow. Anyway, we could not ordinarily give much more than amused attention to this charming bit of touristic banality. As a preparation, however, for the very last passage of the itinerary, it appears more important than at first glance. Reflecting on his 21-year project to study tous les hasards et tous les chagrins as an exile, Chateaubriand notes elegiacally how every one of his books have been, in fact, a kind of prolongation of his existence. A man with neither home nor possibility of acquiring one. He finds himself well past his youth. If heaven accords him eternal rest, he says, he promises to dedicate himself in silence to erecting a monument of patrie? Yeah, right? Patrie. I need to find out what this word means. Oh, patrie is country. Where was I? Oh, a monument to his country. What he is left with on earth, however, is his writing, which, if his name will live, has been enough, and if it will not live, has been too much. These closing lines send us back to his interest in getting his name inscribed on the pyramids. We will have understood that his egoistic Oriental memoirs supply us with constantly demonstrated, indefatigably performed experience of self. Writing was an act of life for Chateaubriand, for whom nothing, not even a distant piece of stone, must remain scriptively untouched by him if he was to stay alive. It's all about him. If the order of Lane's narrative was to be violated by scientific authority and enormous detail, then Chateaubriand's was to be transformed into the asserted will of his ego in the Orientalist canon as a highly volatile individual. Chateaubriand would make everything he said about the Orient dependent on his ego, while Lane would make sacrifice to Orientalist canon. Yet neither writer could conceive of his posterity as continuing fruitfully after him. Lane entered the impersonality of a technical discipline. Work should be used not as a human document. Chateaubriand, on the other hand, saw that his writing, like the token inscription of his name on a pyramid, would signify self. If not, he had not succeeded in prolonging his life by writing. It would be merely excessive and superfluous. Okay, let's take a break there. Any questions? Right, any questions you have, you can put in the chat. Reminder, this is the goal for today. In the words of the Swedes I am friends with, I need to find a job. And I'm probably going to ask one of the bigger creators if I can co-host. They think in a way that feels like a fork. I like that. They want their work to last for all time. A job. Even if all the travelers to the Orient after have taken their work into account, in some cases even to the extent of copying them verbatim, their legacy embodies the fate of Orientalism and the options to which it was limited. Either one wrote science like Lane or personal utterance like Chateaubriand. The problems with the former was his impersonal Western confidence that descriptions of the general, collective phenomena were possible, and its tendency to make realities not so much out of the Orient as out of its own observations. The problem with personal utterance that inevitably retreated into a position equating the Orient, aesthetically speaking, was that it provided a private fantasy, even if that fantasy was of a high order indeed. In both cases, of course, Orientalism enjoyed a powerful influence in how the Orient was described and characterized. But what that influence always prevented, even until today, was some sense of the Orient that was neither impossibly general nor imperturbably private. To look into Orientalism for a lively sense of Oriental's human or social reality as a contemporary inhabitant of the modern world is to look in vain. The influence of the two options I have described, Lane's and Chateaubriand's, the British and the French, is a great deal of the reason for this omission. The growth of knowledge, particularly specialized knowledge, is a slow process. Far from being additive or cumulative, the growth of knowledge is a process of selective accumulation, displacement, deletion, rearrangement, and insistence within what has been called research consensus. And this is how cultures, languages, recipes, this is how entire civilizations die. Because the West erases them. The legitimacy of such knowledge, such as Orientalism, was during the 19th century stemmed not from religious authority, as had been the case before the Enlightenment, but from what can call the restorative citation of antecedent authority. Beginning with Saïd, the learned Orientalist attitude was that of a scientist who surveyed a series of textual fragments, which he thereafter edited and arranged as a restorer of old sketches might put a series of them together for a picture they implicitly represent. Consequently, among themselves, Orientalists treat each other's work with the same citationary way. Burton, for example, would deal with the Arabian Nights or Egypt indirectly through Lane's work by citing his predecessor, challenging him even though he was granting him very great authority. Naval's own voyage to the Orient was by the way of Lamartine's, the latter by the way of Chateaubriand. In short, it was a form of growing knowledge that resorted mainly to citations of predecessor scholars within the field for its nutriment. So none of them actually knew. None of them actually knew what the fuck they were talking about when they were writing, especially about the Middle East, or what they called the Near East. It's painful. Even when new materials came his way, the Orientalists judged them by borrowing from those predecessors, as scholars often do. their perspectives, ideologies, and guiding theses. In a strict way, then, Orientalists after Sacy and Lane rewrote Sacy and Lane. After Chateaubriand, pilgrims rewrote him. From these complex rewritings and actualities of the modern Orient were never systematically excluded, especially when gifted pilgrims like Nerval preferred Lane's description to what their eyes and minds showed them immediately. I will not even believe my eyes, I will only believe what another white man tells me. That's basically it. In the system of knowledge about the Orient, then, it is less a place than a topos, a set of references, congeries of characteristics that seem to have origin in a quotation or fragment of text or a citation from someone's work on it. Thank you. Or some bit of previous imagining, or an amalgam of all of these. Direct observation or circumstantial description of fictions presented by writing on the Orient. Yet, invariably, these are totally secondary to systemic tasks of some sort or the other. In Lamartine, Nerval, and Flaubert, the Orient is a representation of canonical material guided by an aesthetic and executive will capable of producing interest in the reader. Note that every single one of them got translations and interpretations wrong because they did not ask the locals. Yet all three writers, Orientalism or some aspect of it, asserted the narrative consciousness is given largely to role play. What? Largely to role play? Why did? Anyway, consciousness is given a large role to play. Okay. This book is old. It still has errors in it. What we shall see here is that for all its eccentric individuality, this narrative consciousness will end up being aware, like Bouvard and Péchuchet, that pilgrimage is, after all, a form of copying. Hi. So, welcome in, everyone. I need to actually check this. Woohoo! Thank you so much to the peoples. Who sent me $30 on the PayPals. I have to do maths in my head. I hate numbers. There you go. I'm just glaring at you. So, they will only believe another white man's account of what is essentially a realm that does not belong to the white man. Because the white man is the only person who has authority in terms of knowledge and knowledge dissemination. This is to them. So they constantly quote each other and consult each other's works instead of actual observation, because they themselves cannot trust what they see in front of them if it's not through the filtered lens of whiteness and the idea of conquest. When he began his trip to the Orient in 1833, Lamartine did so, he said, as something he had always dreamt about. Comme un grand acte de ma vie intérieure. Un voyage d'Orient, comme un grand acte de ma vie intérieure. A voyage to the Orient, is like a grand act to his soul, I guess. He is a bundle of predispositions, sympathies, biases. He hates the Romans and Carthage. He loves Jews, Egyptians, and Hindus, whose Dante he claims he will become. Armed with formal verse, adieu to France, which he lists everything that he plans to do in the Orient, embarks for the East. At first, everything he encounters either confirms his poetic predictions or realizes his propensity for analogy. Lady Hester Stanhope in is the Cirque of the desert. The Orient is the country of his imagination. The Arabs are primitive. Biblical poetry is engraved of the land of in the land of Lebanon, or Lebanon as it should be called. The Orient testifies to the attractive largeness of Asia and to Greece's comparative smallness. Soon after he reaches Palestine, however, he becomes an incorrigible maker of the imaginary Orient. Maybe the person who wrote the Bible was high. I'm convinced. Because as soon as people go to Palestine, like there must be something in the water. Of inner life. Thank you. I don't know, like these white people, they were a problem. Yeah, they still are, obviously. But yeah, okay, JJ, I get you. It is every single one of them when they reached Palestine. Something happened that made them go a little bit loopy. He alleges that the plains of Canaan appear to the best advantage of the works of Poussin and Laurent, from being a translation, as he called it earlier. His voyage now turned into prayer, which exercises his memory, soul, and heart more than it does eyes, mind, or spirit. Shisha! The olive oil is too good. Honestly, it fills me with the sense of Schadenfreude that Israelis are allergic to olive tree pollen. And they say they belong in Israel. Yep. The majority of Israelis are allergic to olive tree pollen. They're also allergic to the sun. So there's that. This candid announcement completely unlooses Lamartine's analogic and reconstructive and undisciplined zeal. Christianity, a religion of imagination and recollection, since Lamartine considers that he typifies the pious believer, indulging in himself accordingly. A catalogue of his tendentious observations would be interminable. A woman he sees reminds him of Haydée in Don Juan. The relationship between Jesus and Palestine is like that of Rousseau and Geneva. The actual River Jordan is less important than the mysteries it has, giving rise to one's soul. Orientals and Muslims in particular are lazy. Politics are capricious, passionate, and futureless. Another woman reminds him of a passage in Atala. Neither Tasso or Chateaubriand, whose antecedent travel seems to harass Lamartine's otherwise heedless egoism, got to the Holy Land right, and on and on. His pages on Arabic poetry, about which he discourses with supreme confidence, betray no discomfort to total ignorance of the language. All that matters to him is that his travels in the Orient reveal to him how the Orient is the land of cults and prodigies, and that he is its appointed poet in the West, with no trace of self irony, announcing, "The Arab land is the land of prodigies. Everything sprouts here, and every credulous or fanatical man can become a prophet in his turn." He has become a prophet merely by the fact of residence in the Orient. Plant sperms. Don't like it? Maybe men shouldn't think spreading seed is cool then. That is. Yep. Yep. I like it. By the end of his narrative, Lamartine has achieved the purpose of his pilgrimage to the Holy Sepulchre, that beginning and end point at all time and space. He has internalized reality enough to want to retreat from it back to pure contemplation, solitude, philosophy, and poetry. He is transformed into a latter-day Chateaubriand, rising above a merely geographical Orient, surveying the East as if it were a personal, or at least a French, province ready to be disposed of by the European powers. From being a traveller and pilgrim in real time and space, he has become a transpersonal ego identifying itself in power and consciousness with the whole of Europe. What he sees before him is in the Orient, is the process of the inevitable future dismemberment, being taken over and consecrated by European suzerainty? Suzerainty. I've read this word before. Israel. Yes, Anachronista. That's not a trance I heard of before. Thus, in Lamartine's climactic version of the Orient, is reborn the European right to power over it. And that is important, because every single European writer writing about the middle to the far, well, the near to the Far East has laid upon it so much mythology that it becomes European. This sort of suzerainty, thus defined and consecrated as European right, would consist principally of the right to occupy one or another territory, as well as coasts, in order to found there either free cities or European colonies or commercial ports of call. Nor does Lamartine stop at this. He climbs still higher to the point where the Orient, what he has just seen and where he's just been, is reduced to nations without territory, country, rights, laws, or security, waiting anxiously for the shelter of European occupation. The way they discover is rape and practiced cultures that observe. Yep, when it comes to the writing. Oh, definitely of the era, yeah. Definitely. It's all excuses. These are lesser people, therefore they must be colonized. And I'm going to read one more large passage and then stop there for the night. In all the visions of the Orient fabricated by Orientalists, there is no recapitulation, literally, as entire as this one. For Lamartine, a pilgrimage to the Orient has involved not only the penetration of it by an imperious consciousness, but the virtual elimination of that consciousness as the result of its ascension to an impersonal and continental control over it. Its actual identity is withered away to a set of consecutive fragments. His recollective observations, which are later to be gathered up and brought forth as a restated Napoleonic dream of a world hegemony, whereas Lane's human identity disappeared into the scientific grid of his Egyptian classifications, Lamartine's consciousness transgresses normal bounds completely. In so doing, he repeats Chateaubriand's journeys and his visions only to move beyond them into a sphere of the Napoleonic abstract by which worlds and populations are moved like so many cards on a table. What remains of the Orient in his prose is not substantial at all. Its geopolitical, reality has been overlaid with his plans for it. The sites he has visited, the people he has met, the experience he had, reduced to a few echoes of his pompous generalizations. The last traces of particularity have been rubbed out in the résumé politique, in which the voyage to the Orient concludes. Against the transcendent quasi-national egoism of Lamartine, we must place Nerval and Flaubert in contrast. Their works play a substantial role in the total movement, a much greater than Lamartine's imperialist voyage. Yet both of them, like Lamartine, came to the Orient prepared for it by voluminous reading in classics, modern literature, and academic Orientalism. About this preparation, Flaubert was much more candid than Nerval, who in Le Fil de Feu disingenuously says that all he knew about the Orient was a half-forgotten memory from his school education. The evidence in his voyage flatly contradicts this and shows as much less systematic and disciplined knowledge of Orientala than Flaubert's. More important, however, is the fact that both writers, 1842 to 1843 and 1849 to 1850, have greater personal and aesthetic uses for their visit to the Orient than any other 19th century traveller. It is not inconsequential that both were geniuses to begin with, and both thoroughly steeped in aspects of European culture that encouraged a sympathetic, if perverse, vision of the Orient. Both writers belonged to that community and thought that feeling that described by Mario Praz in The Romantic Agony, a community for which the imagery of exotic places, cultivation of sadomasochistic tastes, a fascination with the macabre, and with the notion of the fatal woman, with secrecy and occultism, all combined to enable literary work sort of produced by the likes of Gautier, himself fascinated by the Orient, Swinburne, Baudelaire. For these two writers, female figures such as Cleopatra, Salome, and Isis have a special significance that was by no means accidental. That their work on the Orient, as well as their visits to it, was preeminently valorized and enhancing female types of this legendary, rich, suggestive, and associative sort. And there I will stop for today. And here we see the first sort of exotification of the woman, the Oriental woman. Any questions? Right. I don't know if you were you in VC with Quintessa last night? Do they have to be do they have to be do they have to be in one piece? Yeah. So I'm going to say goodnight to YouTube and Twitch. See y'all tomorrow for more abolition talk. If these get tiring for you because things are too political, tough. Because we talk about politics. And I shall see you on YouTube and Twitch tomorrow. I'm going to stay on TikTok for a couple of seconds and yeah, do the things. Remember that I have my pay links in my bio. Board Panda Daily is closing down, so I'm not going to have a job. If you can help in any way, shape, or form, that would be appreciated. Thank you. Bye.